In the dark years of the Second World War, as the Allies prepared to liberate Europe from Nazi occupation, the outcome of the war hinged not only on tanks, planes, and soldiers, but on deception. The success of D-Day depended on convincing Hitler that the Allied invasion would strike somewhere other than Normandy. That deception worked, and at its center stood a single man, a Spanish double agent known to the British as Garbo. His real name was Juan Pujol García, and his fabricated network of spies would become one of the most successful deception operations in military history. Pujol was not a trained spy. He was an ordinary man, born in Barcelona in 1912, who despised both fascism and communism after witnessing the brutal polarization of Spain during its civil war. When the Second World War erupted, he made an extraordinary decision. He wanted to help stop Nazi Germany by becoming a spy for Britain. But his first attempts were met with rejection. The British intelligence service had no reason to trust an unknown Spaniard with no experience. Undeterred, Pujol decided to act on his own. He approached the Germans first, offering to spy on Britain. They accepted. The Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence, trained him, supplied him with invisible ink, secret codes, and money, and sent him to Britain, or so they believed. In reality, Pujol never left Spain. Instead, he began crafting an entirely fictitious network of agents across the United Kingdom, feeding Berlin a web of lies so convincing that German intelligence completely trusted him. Operating under the codename Arabelle, Pujol reported detailed observations about supposed British troop movements, ship departures, and political conditions. He invented dozens of fictional sub-agents, from an imaginary Welsh nationalist to a network of dock workers, each with their own backstory, handwriting style, and voice. Every report was carefully designed to appear authentic, peppered with real details that could be verified through newspapers or radio broadcasts. Soon, his reports were being passed to the highest levels of the German command. The Abwehr was so impressed that they began paying him large sums of money to expand his spy network. They even awarded him the Iron Cross, one of Nazi Germany's highest military honors, though he never set foot in Britain during those early years. Meanwhile, in London, British intelligence began hearing about this mysterious German spy whose network seemed to exist all over the UK. Instead of arresting him, MI5 realized what was happening. Someone in Spain was already misleading the Germans, and doing it brilliantly. In 1942, they brought Pujol to London and formally recruited him as a double agent. From that moment on, he became Garbo, named after the actress Greta Garbo, because, as his handlers joked, he was the greatest actor in the world. Now operating under MI5 supervision, Garbo's fictional spy network grew into a massive phantom army. His messages were carefully crafted in coordination with the British deception units, including the 20 Committee, named because the Roman numerals for 20, XX, symbolized a double cross. Every communication was part of a broader Allied strategy to mislead the Germans about the true location of the invasion of Europe. By 1944, as the Allies prepared for Operation Overlord, the code name for the D-Day landings, deception became a matter of life and death. The Allies needed to convince Hitler that the main invasion would strike not at Normandy, but across the English Channel at Pas de Calais, the narrowest point between England and France. If German forces were drawn to Calais, it would leave Normandy relatively unguarded during the crucial first days of the invasion. This massive deception campaign became known as Operation Fortitude. It involved dummy tanks made of rubber, fake radio traffic, and a fictitious army, the 1st U.S. Army Group, supposedly commanded by General George S. Patton. But the most critical element was intelligence, reports that would reach the German high command and seem entirely credible. That responsibility fell to Garbo. From his safe house in London, Garbo and his British handlers sent hundreds of coded messages to the Germans. His network of imaginary agents described elaborate troop movements in southern and eastern England, all pointing toward Calais. He sent false information about supply depots, airfields, and landing craft being assembled in Dover. Each message was carefully timed and realistic enough to withstand scrutiny. Garbo even created a plausible rhythm of communication, sometimes delaying messages to appear cautious, sometimes sending urgent warnings that arrived just a little too late to prevent German losses. This pattern made him seem authentic, even fallible. In intelligence, a perfect spy is a suspicious one. Garbo knew that well. In the weeks before D-Day, the Germans trusted him so completely that they placed him in direct communication with their high command in Paris. Hitler's generals read his reports daily. When June 6, 1944 arrived, the day the Allies stormed the beaches of Normandy, Garbo sent a message saying that this invasion appeared to be only a diversion. He told his German handlers that the main Allied force was still waiting to strike at Calais, and that the Normandy landings were a feint to draw their defenses away. The message worked. German commanders, believing Garbo's reports, held back their panzer divisions near Calais, expecting the real invasion to come in the following days. For nearly 2 critical weeks, the Germans refused to redeploy their reinforcements to Normandy, even as the Allies secured a beachhead and began advancing inland. Historians estimate that Garbo's deception saved tens of thousands of lives. By keeping the German reserves immobilized, he allowed Allied troops to gain the foothold that made the liberation of France possible. Without that delay, the Normandy invasion might have failed, or at least been far bloodier. But Garbo's mission didn't end there. In the months following D-Day, he continued to feed misinformation to Berlin, reinforcing the illusion that Calais remained the true target. Even after Allied forces had broken out of Normandy and were racing across France, German intelligence clung to Garbo's reports. Hitler continued to believe that the main invasion was yet to come, well into August 1944. The deception had achieved total success. Garbo's fictional army had outmaneuvered one of the most powerful intelligence networks in history. When the war finally turned decisively against Germany, Garbo's role faded into the shadows. But his work had already shaped history. By the time the Allies liberated Paris in August 1944, Hitler's generals were still waiting for the mythical Calais invasion. The credibility of Garbo's reports had been so strong that even after the Normandy landings had clearly succeeded, German intelligence continued to believe in his network. His final messages to the Abwehr reinforced this illusion, thanking them for their trust and claiming that his network had been temporarily disrupted by Allied counterintelligence. By then, the Germans were losing contact with most of their agents in the field, not realizing that many of them, like Garbo, were double agents working for Britain. The entire German spy network in the United Kingdom had been turned or neutralized by MI5. Garbo was their crown jewel. For his service, the British awarded Juan Pujol García the Order of the British Empire. Ironically, the Germans had already awarded him the Iron Cross months earlier. To this day, he remains one of the few men in history to be decorated by both sides in the same war. After the war, Garbo faced a new kind of danger. He knew that if former Nazis or collaborators discovered his true identity, they might seek revenge. To protect himself, he staged his own death. In 1949, official records reported that he had died of malaria in Angola. In reality, he had quietly slipped away to Venezuela under a new name. For decades, he lived in anonymity, running a small business and raising a family, while the world forgot the man who had fooled Hitler himself. It was not until the late 1970s that historians began uncovering the full scope of the Allied deception operations. When British author Nigel West traced Garbo's story, he managed to locate him, alive, quiet, and still modest about his accomplishments. In 1984, Garbo returned to Europe for the 40th anniversary of D-Day. Standing on the beaches of Normandy, he met some of the soldiers whose lives he had helped to save. For the first time, the quiet Spaniard behind one of the greatest intelligence coups in history was publicly recognized. To understand Garbo's genius, one must look beyond the mechanics of espionage. His success came not from advanced technology or complex codes, but from human psychology. He understood that people, even in the most rigid hierarchies, believe what they expect to be true. The Germans expected the invasion to come at Calais because it seemed logical. It was the shortest route, the most direct crossing. Garbo simply gave them the story they already believed, dressed in authentic details, reinforced with discipline, patience, and impeccable timing. Intelligence historians later called Operation Fortitude the most successful deception in military history. But Garbo's personal contribution stood apart. His fictional agents, numbering more than 20, became so detailed that MI5 kept a separate file for each, complete with letters, expense reports, and even death notices. The Germans never suspected that none of them existed. Throughout the operation, Garbo transmitted over 500 radio messages and hundreds of written reports. Each was carefully reviewed by MI5 and coordinated with Chef, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, to align with real movements and events. The scale of coordination was extraordinary. Dozens of officers ensured that every falsehood supported the greater illusion. Yet, at the core, it all depended on one man's credibility. His talent for improvisation was unmatched. When the Germans noticed inconsistencies, Garbo crafted plausible explanations: illnesses, communication failures, or even betrayals within his own network. These small imperfections made his web of lies more believable. His greatest strength was his understanding that truth and deception are not opposites, but neighbors. The best lies always contain fragments of the truth. By 1945, as the war drew to a close, Garbo had become one of Britain's most valuable assets. And yet, he never sought fame or fortune. He viewed his actions as a moral duty, a contribution to defeating tyranny. "I wanted to do something for humanity," he later said in interviews. "I was just an ordinary man who wanted to make a difference." The scale of that difference is hard to overstate. Had the Germans correctly identified Normandy as the invasion site, they could have reinforced it with more than 2 additional armored divisions within days. The initial Allied landings, fragile and chaotic, might have been thrown back into the sea. The liberation of Western Europe could have been delayed by months or even years. Instead, because of Garbo and the web of lies he wove, the Allies gained a critical foothold that ultimately led to the collapse of Nazi Germany less than a year later. His deception shortened the war and saved countless lives on both sides. After his rediscovery, Garbo lived quietly in Venezuela until his death in 1988. He remained humble to the end, never portraying himself as a hero. To him, the victory belonged to those who fought and died on the beaches of Normandy, the soldiers who paid the price for freedom. He had merely helped them from the shadows. Today, Garbo's story stands as a reminder that wars are not won by force alone. Strategy, deception, and intelligence, wielded by minds like his, can change the course of history. D-Day was the largest amphibious invasion ever attempted, a massive gamble that could have failed catastrophically. But because one man convinced the enemy to look the other way, it succeeded. Juan Pujol García, the man who created a world of lies to protect the truth, remains one of the unsung architects of victory. In an age dominated by machines and armies, he proved that the power of one determined mind could alter the destiny of nations.